Hey guys, so I have a suggestion from a subscriber to create a video for creating a table, a tutorial on creating tables. And I thought it was a great idea for people that are just getting started with databases. So let's dig into it. So some guidelines when you're designing tables and databases, you got to remember that database design involves organizing information. And what you want to do is you want to organize tables so that they can be accessed in a logical way that makes sense and they can be accessed efficiently. Table names must be unique in your database, so you need to keep that in mind. And we want to have descriptive and accurate names for the tables for the data that they're going to contain. And all databases have reserved words. So try and create table names that don't overlap with those reserved words. In some cases, you actually can create tables with reserved words, but again, it's something you want to try and avoid. And when you're designing tables in your database, consider the number of rows that accumulate in the table. And you may hear people with a fancy term here. It's called capacity planning when people are referring to this activity. So here's some basic syntax for creating a table. And we're gonna dig into this in detail in a minute. But I did want to give the basic structure so you have an understanding. So we're gonna say create table, and then we're gonna give our table a name. And then we open a parentheses, and then we have a list of columns separated by commas. So you have a column name, and then you have to give it a data type. And you can actually give constraint information. So in this case, we're saying column 1 cannot be null on any row in the table. It has to have a value. And then we've got the other columns that are listed with their data types. And then I've got here a constraint that I'm creating, which is a primary key on the table on column 1. And that's going to guarantee that every row is unique in the table based on the column 1. And just here, I've got an example of creating an index on our table. So we say create index, give the index a name. We say on, and then the table name, which is the one we've just created. And then we give the column or list of columns that are going to make up our index. Now let's look at an example. So we'll switch over to our SQL window here, and we've got a table named customer that we're going to create. So we've got create table customer, and then we've got our list of columns. So we've got a customer ID, which we're going to have as a number. And then this generated always as identity, it just means that, and this is Oracle syntax, by the way, this means that Oracle is going to generate a value and assign it to customer ID. So it starts with 1 and then 2 and then just continues. Then we've got first name, and we have to give it a data type. We're going to give it a varchar2, which is like a string in Oracle, with a max length of 50. And then last name with a max length of 50. And we're going to say date of birth, and that's going to be a date column, date data type. We're going to say add street address with a max length of 100, city 100, state province with a length of 50, and then we're going to have this order count column here, which is going to be the number of orders that this customer has placed. And that's just going to be an incremental counter every time an order is placed in the system. So we're going to have to maintain that somehow, either with the module in the system that's creating the orders, or you could have some kind of background process that's keeping it in sync asynchronously. Each day just count all the orders for customers and then put it into this table. Lots of ways to do it. Then we've got a constraint, and this is a primary key. So we're going to say that every customer ID in this customer table needs to be unique. Now we're going to put some data into the table. We got one row we're going to insert here. So with the syntax is insert into customer. Then we name all the columns. And you notice we don't have customer ID here because that's getting generated by the database. So we don't need to provide it. So we're giving a first name, Tom, last name, Smith, date of birth, 1/1/1965, city of Memphis, state of Tennessee, and we're going to initialize order count to 0. Now we're going to add an index. So we're trying to figure out, well, what are people going to likely query this table on, the customer table? And a good candidate is probably the last name. So we're going to create an index on the customer table on the last name. And that's going to make queries like this more efficient. So We're going to select from the customer table where last name equals Smith. Now, if we don't have an index, these are what they call blocks or pages of the table. If you don't have an index, the database has to scan every one of them until it gets to the end, because it doesn't even know if there may be more than one with a customer with the last name of Smith. So it's got to scan every one of them. And then an index, it's going to look a little bit more like this. So it'll take, and the way the structure is built is it looks at, in this case, like what's the leading character? It's S. So it's going to go into the index structure and say, okay, well, show me where rows are that begin with S, and it's going to go left or right depending on how the index is structured and how things kind of made their way into the database and how things are distributed. So let's say that we have to go to the right, and then we say, okay, is S here or here? And then it'll go down to the index structure, and it'll be able to, like in this case, it would go down 3 levels instead of scanning through every block or page in the table. And that's what index structure allows you to do. Now, continuing on, we're going to talk about alter table. So we can add columns. So we didn't have a postal code. So in this case, we're going to add a column named postal code to our table with a varchar to a 50 length. And what will happen here is that the inserted row, remember we inserted a row here, it didn't have a zip code or a postal code. So it's just going to go in as null. So just something to be aware of. If you add a column, you might have to have a follow-up process to go assign these if they're actually needed. And here's an example of modifying a column. So we're going to take the street address and we're going to expand it to 200 characters. So pretty simple. Something to keep in mind though, you could actually change data types, but you need to be careful. If we were changing street address, for example, from a varchar2 to a date, probably might fail and you get some errors. So you need to deal with that. And here we're going to drop a column. So I got a typo here. So alter table customer, and we're going to drop the column and just give it the name of the column. That's it for today's video. I appreciate the question. I hope that helps some people. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're liking the videos and you're watching them to the end. Hey, why not subscribe? And if you have more questions, send them to me. Thanks, guys.